Welcome back to Joe Stunner Boxing. There are lots of fights that never happened that we sort of fantasize about. You know, if you're a Brit like I am, one that springs to mind is Junior Witter against Ricky Hatton. I'd love to have seen that fight. Harold Graham against Nigel Benn or Chris Eubank would have been a brilliant one. And I'm sure there are many, many others, fighters that just never faced each other. You know, if you are a hardcore fan, um, you go way, way, way back. Fighters were avoided. You know, we go back to when the colour bar was in and black fighters weren't fighting. Like, for example, during Jack Dempsey's time, there were fighters who he could have faced, but because the colour bar was in place, they didn't face each other. Now, one fight that often gets mentioned whenever we talk about great fights that never happened is Lennox Lewis against Riddick Bowe. And I get a lot of heat from people when we talk about this because to me, Bowe and Lewis are two heavyweights they're a perfect example of how heavyweight fighters or any fighters, two fighters, mature at different rates. They have their primes at different rates. And for that reason, I don't think there was ever a time when a peak Bowe could have faced peak Lewis. Okay, let me explain that further. What I mean is that for me, Riddick Bowe, he had a great career and he beat a lot of good guys. People forget how many decent B plus fighters he beat. Of course, we know he beat Holyfield twice. That was the pinnacle of his career. But he also beat, he got a decision over Tony Tubbs. I know a lot of people felt at the time that Tubbs had won that fight, and you can make a case for that. I remember that being a close fight, thinking, I think Tubbs has got this, because I watched that one. I watched it live, but I didn't know the result when I watched it. And I remember thinking, I think he's got this, but no, they gave it to Bowe. Unanimous 10-round decision. All three cards were close, though. He also beat, stopped Bruce Seldon in one round. He beat, who else did he beat? Pierre Kurtzer went out in 7 rounds. Kurtzer was a good South African heavyweight, not bad at all. And he beat Holyfield a couple of times. And even after he lost the title, he was winning a decision over Larry Donald, blew away Herbie Hyde, picked up the WBO belt, which at the time was lightly regarded. Floored Hyde, God only knows how many times. Was it about 6 times? I know he stopped him in 6 rounds, but I think there was about 6 knockdowns there. And then we got to Golota, the 2 disqualification victories. Now, Bowe finished with a 43-1 record, which is very impressive. 33 KOs, only lost to Holyfield. Lewis actually finished. Bowe finished his career, actually. I mean, you see, the 2 Golota fights were in 1996, and then he had a break of 8 years, came back and took on journeyman Marcus Rode and won. He won that in 2 rounds, and then he beat another couple of journeymen. But really, you could say that Bowe's career ended, 8 years previously, 1996, when he defeated Andrew Golota twice. Two victories that were disqualifications. That Golota was clearly winning both fights. There was a riot after the first one, wasn't there? Continual low blows. If you haven't seen those fights, you'll see Golota dominating Bowe. And Bowe looked kind of shot. His third fight with Holyfield, where he stopped him in 8 rounds, he'd also been on the floor prior to that. And Holyfield almost stopped Bowe. And if you go back to his, title-winning effort against Evander Holyfield in 1992, I mean, he never looked better. He looked absolutely brilliant in that fight. And I mean, even the defeat to Holyfield, the 12-rounder, that was a very competitive. That was the fan man, wasn't it? The guy who flew in, landed on the ropes. The fan man, I think they call him, like a hang glider. If you haven't seen the fight, I remember watching this live. It was like on 3 or 4 in the morning on ITV, I think it was. So this guy suddenly appeared and landed on the fucking ropes, Yeah, I mean these were great fights. They really were entertaining fights. And Bowe is not remembered as well as he should be, probably because his peak which was sort of 92, first half of 93 maybe, and also the build-up to the victory over, the first victory over Holyfield, where he was beating people like Kurtzer and Selden and Tubbs. I think Burt Cooper, he did Burt Cooper in 2 rounds. Pinkland Thomas got 6 or 8 rounds retirement, something like that. I mean, he was looking the part. In fact, you could even make an argument that Bowe's peak years, most of them were before he won the title. I say most of them. I mean, I'm talking sort of, let's say 1990 to 92 was Bowe's peak. We'll say that, okay? Now, as you know, you may know, perhaps you don't know, but he gave up the WBC belt that he had. He won it from Holyfield. He gave it up. And Lennox Lewis, who had beaten Razor Ruddock, was elevated to champion. You know, it was what we would now call an email champ, although emails were not really a thing in 1992. And he made his first defence, Lewis, in 1993 against Tony Tucker. He won a 12-round decision where he had Tucker down twice, once early, 3rd round, 4th round, and then later on in the fight. And he beat Frank Bruno. That was a big victory for Lennox in Cardiff. Although Frank Bruno was doing very well in that fight. He was out jabbing Lennox, and Lennox was a good boxer. And Bruno got stopped in 7, but he was doing really well in that fight. And of course, Frank, such was his want. When he got clipped, he just didn't know how to grab and hold. He didn't know how to ride out the storm. And he was battered on the ropes, taking too much punishment, and the ref stepped in. After that, he beat Phil Jackson, stopped him in 8 rounds and did not look impressive. And then he lost to Oliver McCall. This was in 1994. All right, McCall knocked him out in 2 rounds. Now, when he came back, Lennox, they edged him back into world level. He had a couple of runarounds, one with a guy called Lionel Butler, who was a pretty decent journeyman when the mood took him. But he looked very reticent, very reserved in that fight. Like he got rid of Pepe Correa, who was his trainer. He had two previous trainers, John Davenport and Pepe Correa. He got rid of Correa after the McCall fight and hooked up with Emmanuel Stewart. And from here on in, it was almost like Lennox had 2 careers. He had the one leading up to the 1994 defeat to Oliver McCall, and then he had the rest of his career from 95 was the part of the fight, right up to the point where he retired in 2003. Now, apart from Riddick Bowe's little three journeyman comeback, like I said, the 2 fights against Gallotta were in 1996. So Lennox, let's say that effectively Bowe retired in 1996, despite coming back for a couple of runarounds. Lennox retired after the Vitaly Klitschko fight, 7 years effectively after Bowe. And Bowe looked, greatly diminished. Let's be polite and call it greatly diminished. Whereas Lennox, although against Vitaly Klitschko, he had a life and death struggle. I mean, it's a tough fight. He won it legitimately, but it was a tough fight. Klitschko, by the way, was a late replacement. He was supposed to fight, what's the Canadian fella's name? Can't remember the guy's name. Canadian heavyweight, black guy. But instead, the guy pulled out. In steps Vitaly and gives Lennox hell. And so Lennox retired in 2003. But the point is that if you go back to when Bowe had the titles, all right, 1992, all right, he would have, if Lennox had faced him then, Bowe would have faced a Lennox Lewis that was in no shape or form the finished article. Okay, in no shape or form. And I get a lot of stick when I say this to people. I say, if they had fought in 1992, Riddick Bowe would have been a red-hot favourite. I would certainly have picked Bowe to win that, possibly by stoppage, by knockout. Whereas when Lennox got to the pinnacle of his career, when he was at his absolute best, that was years later. I mean, that was, it's difficult to say. I mean, it was a long process. Well, he fought Holyfield twice in 1999. And that was 3 years after Bowe had effectively finished in 1996. If they'd have fought then, obviously, I think Lennox would have won, probably by knockout. So the problem I have whenever people mention this fantasy matchup is that the two guys, they were never at any point compatible because their careers had very different trajectories. Okay. So, after Lennox beat Holyfield, he then went on to splash Michael Grant around in a couple of rounds. He beat Franz both. That was a good knockout back at home. Millwall, was it? Was it in Millwall? Yeah, I think it was. He outpointed David Chua, who was very, very dangerous. He had the 2 fights with Rockman. And don't forget, I know he got flattened by Rockman in South Africa, wasn't it? And then the comeback, the return where he knocked him out in 4 rounds. He had been knocked out in 5, and then he came back and knocked Rockman out in 4 rounds. That, I think, was my favourite Lennox fight, the rematch with Rockman, because he came in knowing that the guy had knocked him flat, and he showed absolute ice water in his veins, and did a number on Rockman even quicker than Rockman had knocked him out, and looked at his absolute zenith that night. But that was in 2001, effectively 5 years after Bowe had kind of shot his bolt. And Bowe never lived the life. He put on huge amounts of weight, especially after the first Holyfield victory. He got rid of Jesse Ferguson and Michael Dokes. It was in 1 round, Ferguson in 2 rounds. Oh no, Ferguson lasted the 2nd round. He did, didn't he? Dokes got done in a round. But they were never, ever on a par with each other. Do you know what I mean? Now, and I think, like I say, I think Bowe had a very, very underrated career because his peak was brief. It was fleeting. Whereas Lennox, Lennox had a great career. He's an all-time great, all-time great heavyweight champ. And he reversed both his defeats, both knockout defeats, and he reversed them with stoppages. Riddick beat the only man to beat him was Holyfield, and Riddick beat him twice, once by knockout. So there is a comparison to be made in their careers, but not. You couldn't really say. That they were again. The trajectories of their careers were so different that it's just. I can't see a point at which it would have been the fight that people fantasize about. The peak Lennox Lewis against the peak Riddick Bowe. Both excellent fighters. So I get a lot of heat about this. People say, you're picking Riddick Bowe to beat Lennox. Yeah, at a particular point in time, yes, I definitely would have picked Riddick Bowe to beat Lennox. But Lennox, again, at another point in time, definitely Lennox wins it. That's the way I see it. But what do you think? Let me know what you think. And of course, they fought in the Olympics, as you may know. Lennox won a stoppage. It's a shame they never got together again, but when would they have fought? I don't know. Maybe if Riddick had lived the life more and his career had lasted up to about, say, 2000, they could have met then and they'd have been evenly matched. But it just wasn't meant to be, was it? But let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. And thank you for watching the video. I think it's an interesting subject. If you're new to the channel, you can subscribe. That'd be fantastic because you're helping the channel out. If you subscribe, it costs you nothing, and you just hit the little button. It's great, isn't it? You're spreading the love, spreading the fistic love, and also that little like button. They count them, so feel free to hit that too. I always appreciate your time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.